Monday, the 6th of August, 1945. It seemed like any other morning in the city of Hiroshima, Japan. The air is thick, humid, cicadas are buzzing, and thousands are walking to work. As children are on their way to school, they spot what looks like a small silver bird in the sky. In reality, it's an aircraft known as a B-29 Superfortress, and it just dropped a nuclear bomb. Then, it happens. Not a roar, not a bang, just a silent, blinding flash. In less than a second, the temperature reaches 300,000 degrees. The heat wave removes color from the world, and it's hot enough to boil the insides of those nearby. Those standing close do not just die, they simply vanish. Only their shadows remain, etched forever into the stone steps. As the smoke rises, 80,000 lives have already ended, but before the nation could even comprehend the horror, before they could bury a loved one or identify remains, it happens again. On August 9th, the city of Nagasaki meets the same fate, and another 40,000 people vanish in an instant. Across the two cities, the death toll would soon climb to over 200,000. Their god had failed them. Their empire became a graveyard. The most unsettling part is not just the explosion, it's the world that rose from the ashes. The relationship between the United States and Japan is described by world leaders as a golden age partnership. Right now, Japanese companies are investing over $1 trillion into the American economy, building our car batteries and our solar grids and our infrastructure. The United States provides Japan 90% of its defense imports and has over 50,000 military members stationed across the country. We are not just allies. We are economically and militarily inseparable. But if you go back 80 years, the relationship was not a golden age. It was a black hole. So how did we get here? How do you forgive the people who erased a generation and turned 40,000 children into shadows? Somehow, Japan conducted a psychological pivot, one that redefines what it means to be human. But before you can understand Japan's forgiveness, you have to look at the madness that made the bomb logical. Japan formally entered World War II in September of 1940 and had a reputation for being a fortress of the mind. The nation shared the same view known as Gyokusai, which translates to shattered jewel, symbolizing death as more honorable than surrender. This meant every citizen was prepared to die for the emperor and for Japan. The elderly were given sharpened bamboo poles, and children were taught to strap explosives to their chests. The United States looked at this psychological wall and saw a nightmare. How could they fight an ideology believed by an entire nation? They couldn't. At least, not without a land invasion costing over 1 million American lives. In March of 1945, the United States attempted to weaken Japanese resolve by dropping 1,600 tons of firebombs on Japan's capital of Tokyo. Imagine a wall of fire turning your city to ash. A heat so strong your skin bursts into flames, and an inferno which rips the air from your lungs. The Japanese refer to this attack as the Night of the Black Snow, and it's one of the most destructive air attacks in history. In a single night, 100,000 people burned alive. But Japan did not blink. They would make it through this war, because for the past 700 years, they knew their land was spiritually protected by the kamikaze, or divine wind. But instead, 2 nuclear bombs shattered this 700-year-old belief and replaced it with the emptiness where a generation once stood. The world expected Japan to react with 1,000 years of vengeance. Instead, the first time the Japanese met their enemy, they did not reach for a blade. They reached for a candy bar. On the night of August 14th, Emperor Hirohito pre-recorded a nationwide radio broadcast to declare Japan's surrender. Since this was considered a fate worse than death, nearly 1,000 officers stormed the imperial palace in attempts to find and destroy the recordings. They did not find them since they were unfamiliar with the palace catacombs, and the recording was broadcast at noon the next day. This was the first time in history an emperor spoke directly to the Japanese people, and he said they must suffer the insufferable. What he meant was Japan was surrendering without using the word itself. This broadcast created a terrifying psychological vacuum and shattered their belief system. The Japanese people expected a bloodbath and that Americans would massacre them. They had been conditioned to see them as oni, demons who would take pleasure in hunting them. But when the American soldiers arrived, they did not bring rifles and bayonets. Instead, they brought Hershey's chocolate bars and gave them to starving children. Aside from the chocolate, the United States provided Japan with over 2 million tons of food rations to help prevent starvation in the aftermath of the war. This triggered a massive wave of cognitive dissonance. This is the conflict you feel when your reality contradicts your deepest beliefs. The Japanese people could not hold the two opposing thoughts of, "This man is a demon," and "This man is feeding me." To stop the mental pain, they had to discard the idea that Americans were demons. It was not just a choice, it was a biological necessity for survival. Because when you're starving, and your enemy is giving you food, your mind finds a way to stop hating him. The chocolate bar effect began rewiring a nation's hatred in a matter of weeks. But food can only buy us so much peace. As the hunger faded, a new, more terrifying threat appeared on the horizon, one that would force these two bitter enemies into another fight for life and death. By 1947, a new shadow was stretching across the globe. The collapse of the Japanese Empire left a massive political void in Asia, and Joseph Stalin, premier of the Soviet Union, was rushing to fill it. As the Soviet influence stretched east into northern Korea, the Japanese realized they were no longer the masters of the Pacific. They were the next target. This triggered a powerful psychological shift called the common enemy effect. Despite having little in common, Japan and the United States had to work together since they now shared the same threat. Suddenly, the United States did not need a defeated Japan. They needed a powerful industrial ally to help stop the spread of communism in the Pacific. Japan was caught between the American shield and the Soviet sword. In reality, they had no other choice. To stay free from Soviet control, they had to embrace the American occupation. Hatred was a luxury neither nation could afford, and as the United States poured millions of dollars into Japanese factories, the enemy became the protector because they both feared the same threat. For now, Japan was safe, and they were fed, but they were still a nation in ruins. How did they cope as a nation that in their eyes did the most dishonorable thing possible? How did a culture built on a fighting spirit survive in a world where they were no longer allowed to fight? The ruins of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Tokyo are all physical tragedies and psychological ones. The Japanese identity was destroyed. Their strength, their divinity, their purpose, all erased in an instant. This was considered the destruction of an ego on a national scale. But in the void of that destruction, something rare happened. Post-traumatic growth. Your mind has a remarkable capacity for turning a crisis into a new perspective. This is not just resilience. It's how you or an entire nation can reach a higher level of functioning because of trauma. Japan could no longer be a military empire since the United States forced them by law to abandon their army. So they underwent a massive shift in their collective mindset. They changed the meaning of their tragedy and refocused their resolve. They took the discipline once used for war and poured it into their economy. They did not simply forget the bombs. They moved on because their nation needed them to, and rebuilt their entire identity around the ruins of an empire. Within a single generation, the children who saw the flash of the atomic bombs were building the very technology the world depended on. They would go on to build miniature radio transistors, streamline fuel-efficient vehicle production, and produce over 50% of the world's microchips. They turned their trauma into a new kind of power. Was this forgiveness a true healing of their heart? Or was it the most successful psychological mask in human history? The truth is, the Japanese people did not just get over it. The shadows of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are still there. They have not moved since the bombs were dropped, and serve as a permanent reminder we cannot undo the past. But Japan did not try to. Instead, they transformed their trauma into one of the greatest economic rises in history. Today, you'll see high-tech skylines, microchips in your pocket, $100 billion investments in American companies, and American ships docked in Japanese ports. You are looking at a crucial partnership, built directly on top of a graveyard. This is Mind Your History, where we explore the mind behind the moment. Next time, we look at the mind of General Douglas MacArthur and the terrifying reason he was obsessed with using nuclear weapons on China. Subscribe to see how a single ego almost started World War III.